This podcast episode is made possible by wowdigital.com, your trusted partner for nonprofit and charity website and design. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the interconnection between technology and human capital. You're going to find out all kinds of awesome stuff. Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. I'm your host, David, and in this episode, we're going to be talking with Miranda McKie. Miranda's a leader in analytics, focusing on breaking down barriers with underrepresented groups. Recognized with the 2020 Catalyst Internet Emerging Leader Award. That's a mouthful. Co-founded Young Women in Business in Toronto. Go Toronto, yeah. And currently teaching people analytics at Canadian universities. Super excited to have you here so you can share your expertise. Welcome, Miranda.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for being here. Looking forward to this conversation. Teams, right? It's really all about teams. How can we leverage and work with and improve and build upon the people that we have in our teams, whether you're a team of one, how do you manage and level up yourself, or you're a team of 30 or 40? So where do we start? How do we start thinking about this?
Oh, great question. So in terms of, trying to get the most out of your team, really our space is in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we can support organizations essentially establish stronger culture and workplace culture truly to get the most out of their people so that they're able to be more productive, serve their customers, serve their community better. And that really ties into that team space. So as we're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I almost challenge people to think about it differently than just a, nice thing to do, but as a smart business objective to really support and enable your teams to do better for whether it's your clients, the products that you're creating, can really help enable and establish stronger strategic business objectives.
So let's level the playing field here for a moment. You're talking about inclusion. So let's define that. What is inclusion to you?
Yeah. Well, I would say there's inclusion, but it kind of wraps around the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to explain that in more detail, diversity is really referring to everything that makes us unique. Often in the media, diversity, I think, has gone through a little bit of a bad light due to sensationalization of the topic. Often when we talk about concepts of diversity, it's primarily related to maybe race, maybe to gender identity, as opposed to all of the other things that make us unique. I always give the example in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, which refers to essentially all of the things that make us unique and how, as a woman of color, I have very different experiences than maybe someone that's just a woman or identifies as just a woman, or a woman that's a caregiver. So when we're talking about the concept of diversity, especially in the business sense, it's truly about, socioeconomic status, education, age, all of those different things that make us unique. When we talk about equity, that's really referring to how do we leverage the playing field in businesses so all of those diverse demographics actually have opportunity to succeed equally within the organization. Promotions are equal. Recruitment is equal. Onboarding and professional development experiences are equal. And then when we're talking about inclusion, after we kind of have diversity and equity in that space, how do we ensure that all of those people within our organization feel valued, feel comfortable to challenge the status quo, and then that their ideas are actually welcomed within an organization? So I always like to kind of group those three together into what we know as diversity, equity, and inclusion.
People are people, humans are humans. Everybody should have the same opportunities and be eligible potentially for those opportunities based on their skill set, right? Let's get the right people in the right jobs that will get them the most experience in the role, use their experience in the role to help the organization or help the team. And, ultimately grow together and do more better stuff together. So when we think about data and you think about analytics, how can we leverage that to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, great question. And it's exactly as you were saying before, right? I think of diversity, equity, and inclusion as almost like a shared value model. You can do good, and also if that doing good can support, financial outcomes and business objectives, and those pieces go so closely together. And that's why the investment in data is so important. Often when we go into organizations, they'll be like, we want to do diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you're like, why? We don't know. It's the right thing to do. And you're like, that's great. I'm glad you're, invested in it from that perspective. But, what strategic business outcomes are you trying to drive with diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then where are the challenges that you're experiencing in not being able to drive those strategic business objectives? And that's where data comes into play. So if we don't really understand the root cause of a challenge within our organization, if there's maybe particular demographics that we're just assuming are having struggles within the organization, but that's not validated, we're not able to dive into the actual challenge, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. And that's where data comes in. So many organizations today are starting to kind of look at data. Some are still really afraid of data, but it is important when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're looking at our HR data across what we would call the employee life cycle. So all the way from recruitment to offboarding, that we're looking at doing things like sentiment surveys and engagement surveys to understand where those gaps are, always looking at how do we align those two strategic outcomes and business outcomes. So do we notice that our customer success department is very, very unhappy for whatever reason? How is that going to impact how they're servicing our customers? Do we notice that our product teams have a lack of diversity? How is that going to impact business outcomes when we're trying to innovate and develop unique products to serve the market? And bringing that together is truly kind of what makes DEI sustainable. And then the data can truly help you kind of drive that and understand those facts going forward.
Yeah, I think really I think it's really about making sure that people are happy, that they feel invested, that they care about the organization, right? If you have employees that are the term that's been thrown around over the last year is like quiet quitting, right? They're putting in like, not that we need everybody to go way above and beyond all the time, but if you're in a client facing area, if you're a nonprofit, I don't know, let's say you're at a hospital and you're working that front desk, welcoming people coming in, or you're the one answering the phone, helping people. If they're not engaged, if they're not happy, if they don't feel valued as a person deep down, it's going to affect everything. And it's going to impact your organization. Either fewer people are going to come to a program, an event, whatever, or they're just going to be turned off. Let's face it, there are hundreds, if not more, organizations that are doing the same thing that you are. They're going to leave.
And exactly, you bring up a great point, right? People are companies and organizations and non-for-profits' greatest asset. So we need to invest in our people and make sure, exactly to your point, that they are happy, that they're invested in their job, because at the end of the day, those are the faces of the organization. So if they are not bringing 100% of themselves to work, that in turn is just going to impact, your business, your goals, what you're trying to achieve as an organization. And when we have that approach, coming back to that shared value model, doing good, supporting employees, making them feel welcomed and valued, in turn helps to drive some of those goals that you may have as an organization.
To your point, you mentioned that bringing themselves 100% to work. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, so correct me here, right? I think people bring themselves like 80% to work. Right. There's all the baggage. There's all, like, if you've got children, if you've got a parent that's elderly, if you couldn't sleep last night because the neighbor's dog in the apartment was barking all night, like whatever happens, there's things that affect us. Right. And, let's be real about this. We are all people. There's all kinds of, I'm not going to use the word, but stuff going on in our lives. And it affects us in one way or another. And we need to honor that. I guess that's not really the right word, but we need to respect that that's something that happens. Do you have any thoughts in terms of what organizations can do to help people overcome that, deal with it, or I don't know?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great point, right? What employee truly brings themselves every single day 100%? I think what you see is more, okay, maybe yourself, but what you see is more is those ups and flows, right? Where some days maybe it's 120% and you get the most out of that employee, or other days maybe it's more of a 60%. And when we're thinking about concepts of DEI, it's almost a great point of how do we kind of level that. So if we have an employee, for example, that is a caregiver and having challenges at home, and children are really excited that day, and they're daycare and all of those things that are going on that are maybe impacting their way to bring themselves to work, how do we as an organization think through that so we can mitigate that and make their lives, whether it's at work or with different policies, to support them better so that they can start bringing more of themselves to work? For example, why flexible working arrangements are so helpful for caregivers, as opposed to having them rush out to get their kids to school, somehow make pick up and drop off. They're stressing about that all day, as opposed to maybe you can just work from home today and be able to handle that. You may get them for 6 hours as opposed to those 8, but those 6 hours may be more productive than those 8. So it's making those concessions as an employer. And really what I always say is being as empathetic as possible and trying to understand the unique needs of an individual and supporting them in that way to truly, again, as you're saying, try and get them up to be bringing as much as possible to work.
Yeah, I think as an employer or manager or director, whatever your level is in the organization, it doesn't lay solely on you. Maybe this part does, but you need to establish like an open communication, open relationship, open thoughts and ideas so that the people you work with, whether they're employees or they're on the same level or above, that there's a comfort level in saying, you know what, allowing them the opportunity to come and talk to you. To
Exactly.
say, I've got what's going on in my life. I need to take a couple days or I need to take an hour. You know what? I've got some phone calls I need to make at lunch. So I'm going to take like an extra, right? Let's be accommodating. We've all been in positions, whether it was a teenager, like your first job, or in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, where life happens. It does.
Exactly. Yeah. And you bring up the concept of psychological safety, where employees feel comfortable to be able to express what's going on, to be authentic in their day to day and share some of those challenges. And then it goes back, right? When you do that, when you can create that psychologically safe environment for employees to create, a culture of empathy, that does also amazing things. It helps to reduce turnover at your organization. It helps to keep talent at your organization. It helps to kind of make sure that there or support them in being more productive in their roles. So again, there's just so much value in creating that culture within the organization. And as you're saying, it doesn't just rely on that people manager. I would say it's more institutional than that. How does the organization itself start to create that psychological safety? What are some of the processes, the policies, the development training for leaders within the organization to create that environment? And it's so important that organizations holistically invest in that.
So that's great. I think people can probably relate a lot to, you know what, there was that time like 14 years ago where my car broke down and my boss was just really mean and wouldn't let me like take an hour off to like go or like whatever, right? Stuff happens. There's a little story that popped up on my Facebook feed, but I think it's very, very telling of the reality of like workforces. The posting was my coworker died 2 days ago and HR is in their office emptying out their desk and talking about posting a new post to hire a replacement, but there's a family somewhere grieving. Right? Don't be putting your work life ahead of your personal life. You never know, right? A lot of us, our entire personality is wrapped up in the work that we do. And if we're not doing that work, who are we? Miranda, what are some pitfalls that as a nonprofit or charity, kind of regardless of the size, that we can avoid in terms of DEI?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, there's so many things and every organization is unique. And I always want to preface with that. Just because, one organization has a pitfall doesn't mean that that will apply to your organization, because just like people are unique, so are businesses. They have different historical contexts, different challenges that make them unique. But one thing I always say is it's important, especially if you're a non-for-profit executive director, remembering that an employee, they'll be committed to the work. You can get that purpose-driven work from them, but they're probably not going to work as hard as someone who owns a business and is reaping all the benefits from the business, or maybe as hard as that executive director that has that title. So it's important to remember that people are people, and at the end of the day, they're working in a job for compensation. And it's important to always ground ourselves on that, there's only so much that we can be asking for an employee. We don't want them to give up their lives for their job. On someone's deathbed, I don't think anyone says, wow, I really wish I worked more. Usually it's, I really wish I spent more time with my family, my friends, and took care of my health. And it's important to have that lens as an employer when you're working with employees and showing that you respect who they are, you respect their time and the things that they care about, opposed to always just thinking they're here to deliver from a productivity standpoint. And when you have that level of empathy for an employee and you're understanding what motivates them, what their goals are, I think that's really when you start to create a culture where, one, they feel safe, they respect you, they respect the business, they're probably going to support your clients a lot more because there's that mutual respect there.
I think that's really valid. Some people, money's a motivator. Some people, it's creating change is a motivator. Some people, it's helping other people. Understanding each employee, everybody is unique, and what drives them will help you be a better leader. It'll help you engage them in different ways. We started off talking about technology. We haven't really talked about that really at all in any of this yet. So let's dive into that. What is some data? What is some technology that could be used to help make these informed type of decisions?
Yeah, great question. So As I was mentioning earlier, there's something that we call an employee life cycle. And depending on the size of your organization, you may have technology in place to support every area of the employee life cycle, or you may not have anything. And just to highlight what that is, when we talk about the employee life cycle, that's everything from your recruitment, onboarding, professional development, retention and recognition, and then offboarding. And some organizations will actually have systems in place across all of those areas so that they can collect data on employees and essentially have a full view of their employee life cycle and understand all of the things that motivate them to better support them. And especially in the non-for-profit world, just to add into some of that other technology piece, there's, again, as we were mentioning earlier, around sentiment surveys to understand how employees are feeling. And then even there's the piece around understanding the community that you serve. And especially in the non-for-profit piece, when we truly want to make decisions about our people, it's important to truly understand our employees and the community. So asking ourselves questions, does our non-for-profit represent the community that we serve? Are they able to actually make informed decisions on the community that they serve? Do our employees understand our service offerings and are able to innovate and generate service offerings for the community that they serve? And as we're thinking through those things, that's really how data plays a role in that. So looking at, where are there opportunities for our staff to get more support and upskilling so that we can now address some of those community related challenges that we're experiencing? Where are we noticing that maybe retention or performance is low from what we're looking at from the data? What can we do to essentially support that? Where do we notice maybe gaps in our recruitment pipeline? Maybe we aren't representing the community that we serve, and what recruitment sources should we be looking at to bring in new talent to support the community? So again, especially in the non-for-profit space, since so much of the work that we do is supporting the community, it is important that we bring that data together so we aren't just looking at data to look at it, but again, driving back some of those strategic outcomes within the organization.
Are there any software platforms that you would recommend?
So many. There's so many that it's actually hard to recommend because again, organizations have their unique needs. As we talk about HR, though, I can talk about the type of technology. So some organizations will have what we call an HRIS system, which is a human resources information system, which is essentially a tool for non-for-profits to collect all of the information about employees, understand everything from when they took vacation to when they took sick days to how quickly are they being promoted within the organization. Then there's what we call ATS systems, applicant tracking system, which allows you to track different people that are applying for your job and candidates. And now so much more information has become available in these ATSs where you can collect everything from diversity metrics to looking at recruitment sources. How long is it taking you to fill a position? Then there's on the professional development, we have learning management system. Can look at what training are my employees taking? Are they performing well when they're taking training? Then you have performance management systems. We'll track everything from performance reviews to 360 reviews to employees' goals. And then even on the other side of the things, there's some of the offboarding pieces where now there's systems in place to do things like exit interviews. Are there specific demographics that are leaving at higher rates? Why is that happening? And tying into that as well, so you can have a full view of, again, the employee life cycle. But within those categories, there has to be hundreds of different tools and systems that you can choose from.
I guess it's like going and buying a car, right? You go to the dealership and then there's the plethora of options that they have there. And then you narrow it down to a specific one that you want. And then you have different levels of that one, right?
Exactly. That's such a good analogy of buying a car. And usually what I recommend to non-for-profits or any organization when you're going through that process to look through a system, call it conducting a vendor assessment. And that's where you want to define, what are my requirements? What am I trying to get out of these different systems? The budget, all of those different pieces, just like buying a car. And then going to those vendors and seeing how they meet those requirements. So again, you can truly make sure that the vendor that you're selecting is aligned with those organizational goals, as opposed to just picking something right off the shelf because you heard it on a podcast.
Or you're flipping through Instagram, Facebook, and you see an ad. Just because you see the ad, it just means that they're targeting you. They know what your preferences are. They know what you're thinking about. They know what you're looking for. We've done this with some of our clients where we put basically a feature matrix together. To get to the next level, we really need to be thinking in this kind of way. Let's start looking at one type of system. What is it that you're looking to do? Create that going down. And then you basically create a chart. It could be a spreadsheet, whatever you want, all the different product meetings, then tick boxes in terms of like which one could do which whatever. And then whichever one fits your budget and does the most stuff, book a demo. Don't go and buy it. Just book a demo.
Yeah,
Make sure
exactly.
you
Go for the test drive.
right? So in terms of these systems, you mentioned like 5 different ones. Is there one that you think an organization should start with first?
Depending again on the size of your organization, but starting with an HRIS system is usually great. And depending on how often you're recruiting, looking at an ATS solution as maybe a quick follow. Then those would probably be the 2 ones that you would really want to focus on. The other ones you can manage without, if you're a smaller organization, without those systems in place. But HRISs and ATSs just really help you do things more efficiently. And when we were talking about the DEI, consultants use this term all the time, but we want to make sure that we're creating, sustainable initiatives. And again, consultants always use the 3-prong approach from people, process, and technology. So as you're implementing DEI initiatives, we want to think, what do we need to do from a people perspective to make this sustainable? Maybe that's things like training or hiring the right people. What do we need to do from a process perspective? So maybe that's addressing some of those institutional barriers that may exist. And then, of course, what do we need to do from a technology perspective to keep this sustainable and being able to maintain whatever we're doing? So technology does play a huge role in DEI.
I love that you just mentioned people, process, and technology. I really do think, correct me if I'm wrong here, you need to start with the process first, right? What is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to achieve? And then find the people that can fulfill that can deliver on that. And then look at technology and different platforms or things to optimize, to streamline, to make things go smoother, faster, better, whatever that happens to be. Is that kind of your opinion as well?
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's really those kind of 3 pieces. And again, it depends on your organization. I always like to just caveat with that. Maybe you have the process and no people. So you may be starting next with people. But whatever it is, it's looking at those 3 areas. So yes, I agree.
Awesome. Miranda, this has been so great having you here. I'm going to go back and chat with my team and have some conversations internally based on some of the stuff that we spoke today. With that in mind, I like on my episodes to issue a challenge to people that are listening. Anything come to mind that you want to tell people, hey, do this in the next, 2 days, 3 days, 10 minutes after listening to this episode?
For sure. I would say one of the challenges I have for, listeners is to look at your organization and see what data can you today get access to learn a bit more about your people. Even if it's as simple as understanding, headcount over time, or promotions over time. I encourage you to look at that data and start thinking through some use cases on how you can leverage that data to start understanding your workforce better to, again, support some of those strategic priorities that you have.
Well, I think that's really great, Miranda. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what do they need to do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name, again, is Miranda McKie. You can go to our website as well at McKieConsultants.com. And I'll even be so bold to leave my email, which is Miranda@McKieConsultants.com.
It's amazing. If you want any of the information stuff that we talked about, just head over to our podcast page at nonprofitdigitalsuccess.com. Click on this episode for all the details. And until next time, keep on being successful.